So tonight we kind of get a guy by the name of Matthew. So if you would, go to Matthew chapter 10 and verses 1 through 3.
One through three?
Yeah. Again, talking about the 12, actually 1 through 4, it says, summoning his 12 disciples, he gave them authority over unclean spirits to drive them out, to heal every disease, sicknesses, and these are the name of the 12 apostles. First Simon, who's called Peter, Andrew, his brother, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, which we talked about, Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector, James, the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him. So tonight we get to go to Matthew, okay? And with Matthew, if you remember, we had we had Peter and Andrew. Peter, the guy that was kind of outspoken, but actually was the leader. You had James and John, the two brothers. They were called the sons of thunder. Those were the three that basically were the very closest to Christ. You ended up with James being beheaded, John actually being exiled, the only one that actually did not die a martyr's death, but rather was the only one that lived to actually die a physical death, was him. And so when we start talking about Matthew, there's something about Matthew's story that sometimes when you see this calling of the 12, and if you go into a couple chapters before, we'll talk about it. But one of the things that you'll find with Matthew, you look in the comparison, okay, of these guys that are the apostles, okay. You look at Peter and you look at Andrew. Andrew was one of those who had been taught. He was searching for the Messiah, and then all of a sudden, when Jesus comes along, he says, come follow me. Andrew says, yeah, cool, we'll do this. And then he runs to Peter, and he says, hey Peter, you need to come, because this one that we've been looking for, the Messiah, he's here. And so Peter comes and begins to follow Christ. You have James and John, who basically same ordeal, okay? They were taught, they were looking, and all this stuff. And then the others that we had talked about, Philip and Bartholomew, kind of a grouping of together, and who they were. But then when you come into this guy called Matthew, totally different than all of the others. Because Matthew was not a fisherman. He really was not in good with anybody. Matthew was a tax collector. And if you were a tax collector, you were an outcast in that area, in that arena. Because what happened was, you were Jewish, but working for the Roman government. The Roman government stated, for instance, that, let's say that we're going to tax everybody $500. So if I'm the tax collector, I had to pay a pretty penny in order to get that position. So here's the deal. You owe $500. Well, that's what you owe to the Roman government. I'm the tax collector. I could charge you whatever I wanted to. And the Roman government didn't care. All they cared about was you are an instrument of the state, and your job was to get the $500 from the person. If you wanted to charge them $1,000, that's up to you. You could charge them $1,000, and if they did not pay, they'd be thrown in jail. And so nobody liked them because they basically betrayed their own people. They were making a profit off of them, charging whatever number that they wanted to. And so what you find in Matthew is something that when we do a study of these guys, you find certain things in here. And the one that is Matthew is the one on forgiveness. Because what happens is, depending on which side of forgiveness you're on, it may be hard to give forgiveness to someone, or it may be hard to get forgiveness sometimes from someone. And so what ends up happening is, if I come and I say to you, I've wronged you, would you please forgive me? It's kind of wonderful when someone gives you that forgiveness and say, yeah, I do. I mean, you think about it. When you and I got saved, what were we asking for from God? We were asking for total forgiveness for our sins. Now, what if God came up to you and said to you, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm only going to forgive you of half your sins, and the other half, when you get to heaven, well, you're going to have to pay something for it. I mean, no, you want total forgiveness, and for that. But what happens is this, and this is what sometimes people don't understand, that if I come up to you, let's say I've wronged you in some way, some shape, some fashion, and I come up to you and I say to you, I am so sorry. Will you forgive me? And you say no. I'm not going to do that. Well, here's the problem. The problem arises is that because I've asked, I'm clear.
That's right.
If you decide not to forgive me, it's on you now. It's not on me. And the issue is that when you find it, for instance, sometimes in marriages, where there's a situation that arrives, and let's not even talk about infidelity. Let's just talk about, sometimes in a heated discussion, or I'll say discussion, but it ain't a discussion, it's an argument. Okay, that actually exasperates and really comes to a war of words, and you say something to the other person, and then they say something back, and all of a sudden the two of you are conflicting, and then after all of the dust is settled and everything kind of simmers down, I come to you and I say to you, hey, I am so sorry, for what I said. And you say, okay, I'm also sorry for what I said. When there is a display of forgiveness from both sides, that is what God's looking for. And one of the things, that is what is called true forgiveness. Okay? And when you begin to do this. Now, here's the deal. Most of the time, we experience forgiveness privately. You know, again, I've been in churches where for instance, haven't been there for a while, but I've heard of some that have done this recently. A girl gets pregnant and she's not married. And they're in the church, and the guy's in the church. And a lot of times what they'll do is they'll say, okay, you need to come before the church and ask and tell the church what you did and ask the church for forgiveness in a public setting. Or else you can't do this or you can't do that in the church. And so what happens is a lot of times they won't do that and they'll walk away from the church. Because you have now embarrassed me, you've ridiculed me. Now, answer me this question. What if someone lied? Should they come before the church and also ask for forgiveness for lying?
Probably according to them.
Huh?
Probably according to them.
But they don't.
Right.
They only will do the ones that actually, I mean, a pregnancy you cannot hide. A lie you can cover up. And so now they want to take and put sins at a level of this. And so what happens is that most of the time when we're doing the forgiveness part, extending forgiveness or getting forgiveness extended to us, most of the time it's in a private setting. Matthew's was not. Matthew's was in a very public setting. Okay? And so if you go to Matthew chapter 9, and we'll kind of walk through here. Now, what you see is this. Matthew, when you have the list of all of the disciples, Matthew's name is listed there. But there's only one other time where Matthew is mentioned. And here it is. As Jesus went on from there in Matthew 9:9, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax office, his booth. It's really cool. Tax collectors had their own IRS office. They didn't have an auditor, and you didn't have a lawyer. They were it. Here is my booth. This is my jurisdiction. You're in my quadrant, and you got to pay. So here's my booth. I'm sitting here, and when you come by, you got to pay your taxes. Now, we read here of Matthew sitting at the tax collector's office. There was one other time in the Bible that it talks about a tax collection. Remember when that was? You do. You do remember. You don't remember.
Judas?
No. It was really an important day, an important event. It was actually a historic event. It was one of the most historic events ever in history. No. Close. Go to the other end of the spectrum at the birth of Christ. Remember when it was that everybody had to go to their own place? They were doing a census and also collecting taxes. Okay? A lot of times what they would do is they would do tax collections, and it would do a census to count how many people there was, and then they would apportion out based upon the same thing we do today, portion out part of the collections based upon the number of people that are in this locale. So here we go. So he says to Matthew, "Follow me." So he got up and followed him. While he was reclining at the table in the house, many tax collectors, sinners came as Jesus to eat with Jesus and all of his disciples. And so what you find here is that there was only one of the 12 disciples. Most of the other disciples were all fishermen. Only one was ever mentioned as a tax collector. And this was Matthew. And the reason was, this was not, for instance, it's like you're in a conversation with somebody today, and you ask them, what do you do for a living? Somebody might say, well, I'm a nurse, or somebody might say, well, I do this, or somebody does that. Very seldom do you ever hear anybody ever say, I work for the IRS. It's like, no, I don't want to talk to you, about these things, And so this was, and you've got to understand this, this was the most hated, the most despicable and despised human being there ever could be. They were sometimes even put lower than a thief or a robber or a murderer. Okay? And so what happened was, as I've already explained, I bought this from the government. And when I bought it, I was allowed to exploit you. I was allowed to take you, if I can use the phrase, take you to the cleaners. And there's nothing you could do about it. It was all based upon my own greed. How much money I wanted to accumulate. And they did. People were thrown in jail. Remember the story that Jesus used of the man who owed this other man a sum of money, and the guy came up to him and he said, "Hey, let's say you owe me $700," and the guy says, "I don't have money. I don't have $700." And the guy says, "Well, I'll tell you what. I'll forgive your debt. I'll go ahead and I'll mark this paid in full. I'm not. You don't have it. I'll just count it as a loss, and I'll go on." And so the guy who was given the forgiveness of the debt for the $700 had someone that owed him like $7, and the guy wouldn't pay him the $7. And he says, "Okay, I'm throwing you in jail," which you could do. If someone owed you money and they did not pay, you had the authority to have them put in jail. And he did. He had a guy thrown in jail. And Jesus tells the story. He says that the other guy who had forgiven him the $700 found out about what had happened, came to him and said, "How dare you? I forgave you of $700 and you put this person in jail for $7? Well, guess what? You owe me $700. You don't have it? You're in jail. You can't do that." if I'm extending forgiveness to you, then you have every obligation to extend that forgiveness to the next person. Because remember in what's called the Lord's Prayer, which isn't the Lord's Prayer, but is the prayer that Jesus said, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And it's like, okay, you want forgiveness? You want rest? And really what he's saying is, you want restitution or restoration? I will only extend restoration to you if you extend restoration to others. And sometimes we get into trouble here with this, okay? And so what you find is Matthew really is an all-around bad guy. Really bad. And who is Jesus called to be his disciple? The guy did not have a good reputation before he became a Christian. He's terrible. Okay? So what you found that he was despised, okay? Go to Mark chapter 2. Now, you got to look at something. Look at what he says. He says, then, let's see, verse 13. Then Jesus went out again beside the sea. The whole crowd was coming to him, and he taught them. Then moving on, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax office, and he said to him, follow me. So he got up and followed him. Now, go back to Matthew chapter 9. And verse number 9. Now look at this. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew. Mark calls him a different name. And the name that Mark called him by has a great significance. What did Mark call him? Levi. What's a Levite? Priest. Even back then you had dishonest preachers. Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax office. So think about this for a minute. When we said he was a bad guy, what did he leave in order to become a tax collector? Huh? Yeah, he left his priestly family. It doesn't stop there, okay? Because he was a tax collector. This is how bad these people were. They were not allowed to go into the synagogue. They were not allowed to offer up sacrifices. Basically, they were excommunicated out of the family, out of the church, out of the nation, basically. You're no longer part of us. Now that's how bad it is. And sometimes we don't see this because we don't put the two and two together as you begin to start reading the stories, of these people. So when you look at it, it says, while he was reclining at the table in Levi's house. Okay? So it was he was part of that priesthood, but he just didn't. He wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing. Now, one thing that you need to understand is that even though, if we could use the word scoundrel, is probably what we would call him in a terminology that we could all probably understand. When you begin to see that socially, he didn't have any friends. I mean, it's like, no, you're the scum of the earth. I don't want to associate with you. I mean, prostitutes and stuff had more friends than this guy did. He maybe had a few. He had none, except maybe some fellow tax collectors. But then they were always out looking for their own. But you have to look at this. This guy had gone pretty far. But when you look here at verse number 14 in Mark chapter 2, or even in Matthew 9:9, it says the whole crowd was coming to Jesus, okay, to be taught. And so moving on, he saw Levi or Matthew sitting in his office by the sea there on this road. And look at what he said. He just said two words. Follow me. What did he say to Peter? What did he say to Andrew? Follow me. And follow me. What's he say to us? Follow me. He hasn't changed the approach. He's still saying the same thing. Because what Matthew, what Peter, what James and John and all of these gentlemen saw when Jesus said, follow me, and they followed him, remember what he said, what they would do is they were watching Jesus and everything that he did and how much power he demonstrated. And they said, you've got to show us this. Teach us this, Lord. And he says, when you pray to the Father, pray in this manner. This is how I pray to God. So this is the way you should pray to the Father. And I'm praying to my Father. You should pray to him also the same way. And so what he's saying, and has been all along, is, as I was trying to get across this morning, Jesus wasn't saying, here's the rules. He didn't say to them, here's the rules, guys. You got to give 10% to the church. You got to be at every meeting. You've got to pray 3 times a day, and you've got to have your hat on backwards, or your pant leg pulled up, or your left shoe on your right foot. And you go through all these rituals and everything. He didn't say any of that. All he just said was, "Follow me." And that's the same thing that he's telling us to do today. It is a relationship, not a religion. There are so many times that people get so caught up in religions. I was talking to a young lady today, and she was asking what's the difference between a Baptist and the Church of God? And I said, depends on which ones it is. You know, I said mostly it might deal with salvation, because some will say that the only way that you're saved is if you have a sign that you've been filled with the Holy Spirit by speaking in tongues, and then therefore now you're saved. And I said, we don't. I said, I know that I'm a Christian, I know that I'm saved, and I never spoke in tongues in the way that they say. I said, I do speak in tongues because I speak English. And if I go to Mexico and they don't understand English, I am speaking in a tongue. If I go to Egypt and I speak English, I am speaking in a tongue. I need an interpreter to get the message across as to what I'm saying. And I said, that's the only difference. And so, but what happens sometimes, though, is that people get so caught up in a religion. You know, I was when I was on the cruise, we got off, and I shared with you the story that we went to the orphanage. I didn't share the rest of the story. Was after we visited the orphanage, we went to what they call Grandma's house, and what you'll find a lot in some of these areas is that the restaurant isn't like, I'm going to go get something to eat. Okay, so where do we want to go to? Oh, let's just go to Olive Garden. Okay, or let's just go here. They had a Hard Rock in the tourist areas, but in the most of the local areas, what you have is someone who has converted their house into a restaurant. So their entryway, which would be like our greeting room or welcome room or our living room or family room or whatever you want to call it, that was where you dined. There was the kitchen, and the lady, and it was really weird because only one other time I've ever heard this, and this was from people in the Philippines. But again, some of the Filipinos came to Mexico and all of this other stuff, but they would say family, family. You know, we're together tonight, so you are my family, and they address you as such. Family, follow me. Family, let's go to Grandma's house and eat, and that's what they called it, was Grandma's house. Okay, so we go in there to eat, and we got our food, and one of the ladies at the end said, "Hey, do you mind if I say the blessing?" "No, go right ahead." You know, and so I noticed after we all finished, I was the only one that didn't make the sign of the cross. You know, and they do. You know, and a Catholic, it's a sign of the cross. Okay, and the Baptists, we don't. You know, make that. But to them, it is a ritual. But at the same time, some of the things that they do is awesome. We went into one of their cathedrals. Was the first thing that we visited, and the church is the one that actually runs the orphanage. Okay, it's really wild because it's a Catholic church that sponsors the orphanage that is run by a Church of Christ. I know, figure that one out. But anyway, going to the church. What do Catholics do the first thing that they do when they enter the church?
Yeah.
No. Huh?
The thing on the wall.
Well, the thing on the wall. Yeah.
The oil.
Yeah, the oil or the lighting of the candle, I think, is afterwards. But when they come into not into the foyer, but when they actually come into the church, what's the first thing they do? They kneel.
Yeah.
They kneel and they pray, then they sit. You know, hey, that's awesome, man. I wish sometimes as Baptists we would do that. You know, you come right in, and you don't start greeting everybody. Hey, kneel. I mean, honestly, you think of, I think I've shared with you, true worship only comes when your heart is right with God. If your heart is not right with God, true worship never comes. True worship comes when you make everything right with God, which says, God, I am so sorry.
All the time I was growing up, I went to Sacred Heart, I went to St. Anne's, St. Stephen's, and
St. Mary's?
They never had a greeting line. They never went around saying hi to each other. It was only out after the church was over.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I know.
I don't know what it's like now.
I don't know either. I know when we went in there, it was really cool because they had a group of people, and there was a lady that was part of that group. She had a mic and was actually leading mass for the people. I thought it was pre-recorded until I saw the lady with the mic. But she was leading mass. She was leading the service. They were all sitting there, and they were going through their readings, you know, at that time of the day. And she was leading, and then somebody else started doing the singing, you know, that was there. But sometimes as Baptists, well, we got it wrong. I say this so much, we do, because we're not ready for worship. Because what we do is we bring all of the external stuff and baggage that we're carrying into meeting God and never unloading it. And saying to him, you know, God, I really messed up this week. You know, like I shared with you, you know, honestly, I find when I leave home, because before I even leave home, there are certain things that I do. And then I'll come to church and I'll stop at Kroger to get something, or if I have to, and everything. And then I start getting everything ready for the morning. Okay, making sure I've got everything just right that I need. And okay, God, if there's something else I need to add to this, hey, hand it to me. You know, or if we just need to start over, let's start over. You know, and let's just do this. And it never fails. I'll guarantee you, in the 20-minute drive from my house to here, something is going to happen. It's like a known that Satan is going to do something to try to attack and everything. And so that's why I get here earlier than anybody. Okay? Because Satan and I have it out sometimes. It's like, no, you know, it's in order for me to lead you to worship, I have to be ready to worship. And so my preparation is get ready, you know, and it takes me a while sometimes to get there and stuff. But when you begin to look at Matthew, he was not well liked and not well known. Do me a favor. Go to Acts chapter 10 and verse number 43.
Which verse is that?
43 out of Acts chapter 10. Somebody want to read? Don't
To
be.
him give all the prophets witness that through his name whosoever believeth in him shall receive remissions of sin.
Okay, now, think about this for a minute. That even though that Matthew was social outcast, remember what his name was?
Eli.
Levi. Okay. So as him being a Levite, he had to be taught the words of the prophets. He had to have been taught the law. And here's what the book of Acts says. All the prophets testify about him, that through his name, everyone who believes in him will receive forgiveness of sins. So when Matthew saw Jesus, when Matthew heard Jesus, and Jesus says to Matthew, "Follow me," and Matthew did follow him, what happened to Matthew?
He's publicly shown that he was forgiven.
Yeah. He publicly shown that he was forgiven. How did he do this?
He believed in him.
Huh?
He believed in Christ.
I'm sorry?
He believed.
Yeah, he believed in him. And he was showing his belief. He was showing also the acceptance publicly of the forgiveness of his sins by this one called, the Son Son of God. But what did he do? You remember?
Gave the money back.
Huh?
Gave money back.
Well, yeah. But what he did was, if you go on into Mark chapter 2, yeah. Huh? Yeah. You'll find that over in the book of Matthew. He'll talk about this. But it says, while he was reclining, he being Jesus, at the table in Levi's house, or Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners were also guests. Remember what happened? Levi or Matthew got saved or accepted Christ. He threw a party. He invited all of his friends, which were not members of the local synagogue. the only, look at this. He says, many tax collectors and sinners. many tax collectors and sinners were also guests. Okay? So there was Jesus and Matthew and all of these sinners and all of these tax collectors, which were worse than sinners. They were the social outcasts. These were people who weren't allowed in the synagogue. They weren't even allowed around the church. Okay? They were afraid they would steal everything. Okay? We don't want them even near here. They can't come in here. Think about it. The Gentiles were allowed to a certain point in the temple area. These guys weren't even allowed in the gate. You guys stay outside the walls. And Levi, when Jesus is there, Levi had invited all of his friends, which were tax collectors and sinners. That's all he had, because nobody from the church wanted to deal with him. Sound familiar? In a lot of churches. But here's what happened. He says he accepted his forgiveness publicly. How did he do that? He invited all of his friends and said, you need to come meet this guy. You need to listen to him. And what you find is Levi never went back to tax collecting. He said, if I ever took anything from anyone, I will pay it back 4 times. That's a deal, man. If I could ever prove that the IRS ever took too much from me, give me back 4 times. I mean, they want to take 4 times from me. But here's when you begin to find it out. So go over to Luke chapter 5, and we'll find we're going to find out about this party. In Luke chapter 5, so here he is, okay? Then Levi, in verse number 29, it actually started at 27, kind of the same story that Matthew has told and that Mark has told. Now we're coming to Luke, and here's Luke's rendition of the story. After this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector named Levi. He called him Levi, not Matthew, again, sitting at the tax office. He said to him, follow me. So leaving everything behind, he got up and he began to follow him. Then Levi hosted a grand banquet for him at his house. Now there was a large crowd of tax collectors and others who were guests with him. But the Pharisees and the scribes were complaining to his disciples, why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? And he says, Jesus replied to them, the healthy don't need a doctor, but the sick do. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. And so, Matthew, here's the deal. Matthew knew he was a sinner. Matthew knew he needed the grace of God. So what did he do? I need for that message to get to my buddies that I've been hanging around with. Maybe this message will change them also. They need to hear it. They need, okay? And what happened was, Jesus, when the Pharisees and the scribes asked the question, Jesus gave the answer, who needed forgiveness and where they could find it. It wasn't a religion, it was a relationship. Totally and completely, okay?
People don't get that.
Huh?
A lot of people don't get
No, they don't. But if you go back and read some of the writings of Josephus and Philo, who were historians during this period of time, they will give you some more history that you won't find in the Bible, okay? Like, for instance, the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, Jesus never gives you the name, okay? But if you go into the writings of Philo and of the other guy, Josephus, they will tell you about a rich man that was known in the area that Jesus was talking about. And there was a man by the name of Lazarus who was a beggar. And basically they will tell you, here's the name of that rich man that actually went to hell and had 5 more brothers. And so they give you some of the history. And this is the phenomena. of things. That a lot of people say you can't prove the Bible. But yet you can take historians who wrote during that period of time and take some of the stories that Jesus told and leaving out certain facts. And you can go to the writing of these Jewish historians who were alive during that time, where they have gotten the works of them also that have been preserved. And you can find that they will validate and verify the stories that Jesus told. And that these were real people. They were not fictitious people. And these historians will also validate and prove the prophecies of the Bible. And they write about it. And it's like this. You tell me, can you write about something that's going to happen tomorrow with 100% certainty? But you got writers in here that wrote thousands of years before the event happened, and it happens right to the T. The birth of Christ. Those wise men have been looking for that star for over 400 years. It was roughly around 600 to 700 years. Generation after generation after generation. This story had been passed down from the seers during the time of Nebuchadnezzar, when Daniel was being thrown into the lion's den, and Nebuchadnezzar says, "No, that's the God we need to serve, not the God of Baal." And you...
Yeah, but when they wrote, they were inspired by God, led by the Holy Spirit, right?
They had been looking for that star. That star was basically their guidance from God. And the wild thing about it was, how long did it take them to get from where they were at to when they got to see Jesus?
3 years?
2.
2 years.
2 years. It wasn't the wise men came and visited him in the manger. No. That's why Herod said, because Herod asked them very specifically, "When did you see the star first?" "Well, we saw the star first, and here's the date. And we've been traveling." Think about it. How much patience to take a 2-year journey and not know where you're going. I mean, you thought Gilligan's Island was a 4-hour tour. We're talking 2 years, camels, and going over some treacherous places.
We're guided by a star. That star didn't change. That star stayed right.
That star stayed in that same position for them by day and by night. All they had to do was just kept pointing to that star, to that star, to that star. And they just followed that star. And 2 years later, they come to this. And so, when you begin to see this, you begin to also see in the writings. Let me go back to where I was at. In the writings where they talk about Matthew, what you find was, you don't see it in the Bible, but Matthew was always going to the ones who were the outcast. The ones who were like the prostitutes, the ones who were the lepers, the ones that were the social outcasts of the community. That's the one that he was always going to. Because what did Jesus say? Jesus said, "I did not come to the righteous. I came to the ones who were sick, who need of healing."
We're right now in a
Sick world that needs a healing.
literal, right here.
Yeah. And that's what God's trying to say. He says, listen, when they planted this church, 1954. Yeah, it was the year I was born. So when they planted this church 64 years ago, they never ever dreamed what this location would be like. They never dreamed that. And yet it still stays. It still stands. And it's still a place to tell people that, as I said this morning, we really should change this to, we can't legally, but we really should change this to Calvary Baptist Hospital. Because that's who we are.
How do we approach people like the ones across the street? Are dangerous?
Come to my Sunday school class starting next Sunday at 10 o'clock, and I'll show you. I'll show you how to do it. It's
Constantly in my house, day
Oh,
and night.
I know.
Around make sure all the doors are locked.
it's just like, I'll share with you. Today I just saw some people over here next door because I was coming through because I was looking for those cones. Okay, I was on a journey. I was going to find those cones. I found them, by the way. And yeah, I found them. Yeah, but anyway, I saw a couple getting out of the car, and there was a little girl that kind of looked like one that I saw there. And just in an unbeknownst way, I said, hey, I said, are you new around here? And they said, well, yeah, we just moved in. And I said, oh, okay. I said, because I'm looking for 3 little kids that may have been playing over here on Thursday. They were jumping over some stuff, and they said, well, no, she doesn't live here. And I said, I'm glad, I'm not accusing her. I just want to know, have you seen someone? And they said, no. And then that's when we began to start talking. And she says, oh, it's a Baptist church here? And she said, because the church where I moved from was in Miami town, okay, down along the river, Cincinnati. And she says, and I can't make it to my, to my church there, and I'd like to come over. And I said, well, that'd be great. Got any kids? She says, yeah, I do. She says, my son lives in the next apartment. My daughter lives right behind the church here. And I also have a 3-year-old. I said, cool. She says, do you have kids programs? And I said, yeah, Sunday night. And she was going to try to make it tonight. And I didn't see her. I told her it was at 6, and so I didn't know if she showed up or not. But actually, to start conversations with people really is not hard. It's easier than you think. Okay,
Like a VP or something, but to purposely walk over to their home, I couldn't do that. They're scary people. There's scary people, but you also find that you find I don't do it on my own. Okay, I wasn't there searching out someone. I was there only looking for the cones. But God had something else in mind. Right, that's a divine meeting.
And let me say this to you. In all honesty, I have probably in the last 7 years or so, I take every meeting as a divine meeting. I do not take any meetings as a coincidence. There was some reason that God put me right there with that individual. There are no luck or by chance. God had our paths crossed for something. And so so I try to look and I. This is why sometimes people will say, "Are you meeting with so and so?" And I'll say, "Yeah," and they'll say, "So what are you going to say to them?" And I said, "I have no clue.
I don't go with a canned speech. If I go with a canned speech, I may miss what it is that God wants me to say. And I may go in a direction that I shouldn't be going and get nowhere. And so it's the same thing. When Matthew started looking for the outcast, in all honesty, a lot of times, my conversations are not with people that go to church. My conversations are mostly with people who had gone to church when they were in their life at one point in time and walked away from the church for some reason. Others is some event that has now happened in their life that God's trying to talk to them, about. And it's like, boom, that's there. And Matthew, what happened was, Matthew went from this guy, when you read this history of Matthew, you will find that Matthew went from this guy who really thought he had everything to a guy who gave away everything to follow Christ. Matthew, and you see it, the beginning of it, as when he said, if I have wronged anyone, you think about this for a minute. If you gave me taxes, and you were supposed to give me $10, and instead I forced you to give me $40, I had to pay $10 back to the Roman government. I only made 30 out of this. Where do I get the other 90 to pay you back? Because if I got 30 from you and I said I'm going to pay you back 4 times, then that means I'm going to give you $120. And I only collected 40 from you. So I've got to get 80 from somewhere else. Well, okay, well, you can borrow Peter to pay Paul. Oh, yeah, you can do that. And when you get to the last guy, what you going to do when you owe him? So you got to look at it. And Matthew had to give away everything. He didn't have anything left. He was a true sign of being humble and humility, the same as Jesus. He started on that journey when Jesus said, "Follow me," and he continued on that journey even after Jesus died, until his time of death. And this is what you don't see a lot of times. You've got to draw it out in the scriptures. And this is why I say to you, man, the Bible is one of the most awesome books to read that you'll ever find. I mean, they can't put this stuff to the screen. If they were to put this stuff to the screen and put in all of the stuff that you can draw out of this, man, we'd be sitting there watching. You talk about binge watching. we would all be retired because we couldn't go to work. You know, we don't have the space to DVR this stuff that's there. So what we need to understand is that God doesn't only use just stained glass saints. God uses everybody. Some of the worst. As Paul said, Christ came to save sinners, of which I am chief. I'm the worst one there is. And sometimes we need to understand that, yeah, man, I really needed this. And I really needed that forgiveness, Lord. I really did. And so what Matthew shows us is this, that no one is beyond the saving grace of God. He will extend his grace to all of us. and not a one is left out. Okay?
Hello, this is Pastor Chuck Cotton from Calvary Baptist Church. First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for taking the time out to either listen to our sermon or to watch it on video. We are grateful that you've actually taken the time and hope and pray that it has been a blessing to you as it was to us as we delivered it to our congregation. We ask if you have any questions whatsoever that you email us at pastorchuck@calvarybaptistmiddletown.org, or you could come in and give us a phone call, if you would please, at area code 513-423-7251. I'd like to take this opportunity to also invite you to come to our church and visit us, if you would please. We actually have small groups on Sunday morning starting at 9:30, with our morning worship following at 10:45. Prior to our morning small groups, we also provide donuts with coffee, milk, orange juice, a time for fellowship, get to know each other, have a good time before we actually break out into our small groups for Sunday. Our worship services are uplifting, they're fast moving, and everything in our service is just a fast pace. But we do take time every once in a while to slow down as we feel the Holy Spirit moving, and we never want to hinder it in any way. We also have on Sunday evening and during the school year, we have Awana, and Awana starts with the Puggles, actually from age 2 all the way up through high school. And during that period of time, we also have a worship service. Both of these start at 6 o'clock and end at 7:30. Our Wednesday night, we have a Bible study, which starts at 7. We generally finish about 8:15. We would love for you to come and visit with us. Don't have to dress up. Just come as you are, because to us, it doesn't matter. You're a child of God, a creation of His, and so to us, you're important to everything that we do. Our motto here is building the kingdom one life at a time, and we hope that we have a chance to visit with you, get to know you as you get to know us. So thank you, and may God bless you.